Welcome to Concept 2, Multiplication Facts. Today we're going to talk about 3 categories of information that will help you support your student as best as you can through this project. First thing we're going to talk about is the standards that are covered in the concept. Second is going to be important vocabulary that you and your student both need to know, as well as important how-tos, how you can support the usage of different strategies throughout this concept. Let's begin with the standards. As before, we talked about in Concept 1, we have the A3 standard, which is using multiplication and division to solve word problems in situations with equal groups, arrays, and quantities. This is taking that drawing and understanding of arrays to a different level and applying them to not only represent mathematical situations, but to use them as a strategy to help solve facts. The B5 standard, as we used in Concept 1, was for commutative property, but in this case we're going to be using it for the distributive property, meaning that we're going to talk about why it's okay to break apart a fact and then later put it back together in order to solve for the product. There's 2 important vocabulary words that you need to know. The first one is a factor. The factor is the number or numbers being multiplied together. They can represent groups or the number of objects in each group, and there can be more than 2 in a multiplication sentence. For the 3rd grade purpose and standards, we only focus on the 2 mainly. We do talk about multiplying three factors together, which is where we have other multiplication properties that come in, but for this concept we're just going to focus on the 2. But it's okay if you tell your student, of course, if they ask, it is possible to multiply more than 2. We know that factors are in a multiplication sentence because they are separated by the multiplication sign. So if you're unsure of what's the factor, what's the product, you can look for that multiplication sign in between the 2 numbers that are being multiplied together. The example we give is 2 times 3 equals 6. 2 and 3 are the factors here because we're multiplying them together to get that total. Second is the product, which is the answer to the multiplication problem. The total amount of objects being organized into equal groups is the product. For example, 2 times 3 equals 6. The 6 is the product because it's the total number of objects organized into 2 groups with 3 objects in each group. So the how-tos for today are going to be how to solve difficult multiplication facts using the distributive property of multiplication. And I'm also going to show you a nifty video on how to do the 9's fingers trick effectively. Let's talk distributive property first. This property states that a multiplication fact can be divided into 2 smaller facts, solved, and then added back together to get the product of the original fact. Typically, students have a difficult time understanding that they can break a fact apart and then bring it back together later. So it's really important that they spend time hands-on with this property to really understand what it's all about. So this property can actually happen because we're not adding or taking away any objects from the total. Even though we're breaking it into 2 new facts, we ultimately add the pieces back together to recreate the original whole. And it can definitely be used to help struggling learners master smaller facts and then use them to solve larger, more difficult facts. So, best way to do this is to look at an example. This array represents the fact 5 times 6 because it has 5 rows with 6 objects in each row. We're going to use the distributive property to solve for the product. The first thing that you want to do is you want to encourage learners to look for smaller arrays that they see inside of the big array. I like to encourage students to break the array apart in a vertical fashion. So in this case, I decided to break my array into 2 pieces at this point where the black line is. I turned 5 times 6 into 2 new smaller arrays. On the left-hand side, I broke it into 5 times 3, 5 rows of 3. And on the right side, I broke it into 5 times 3, 5 rows of 3 objects in each. The line represents that breaking apart of the picture. In my classroom, what I would do is I would have students build this on their desk using counters, and I'd give them a piece of string so that they can physically cut the array apart using the string. They jimmy it in between the counters. So that could be something you can do. Using whiteboards, having them draw out the counters and draw the line is another way of doing it as well. So the second thing we're going to do is we're going to solve the products of the brand new arrays. So when it's written, it looks like this. 5 times 6 equals 5 times 3 plus 5 times 3, which 5 times 3 is 15. So you are actually adding together 15 plus 15. And the reason that there's a plus sign in between those two multiplication facts, 5 times 3 and 5 times 3, is because we're eventually going to add those back together to get the product of that whole 5 times 6. We're only changing the way the array looks right now. We're not doing anything to the actual total that we have in front of us. Then the third step is going to be to add those two smaller products back together to get the original larger array's product. So when it's written, it looks like this. I have 15 plus 15 equals 30. So that means 5 times 6 equals 30. Next, let's move on to the fingers trick. In this concept, we're going to talk about patterns that will allow students to help become fluent in their multiplication facts. And we focus on the 9 times table because there are tons of strategies out there to help students memorize these facts. One of them being the fingers trick. So it is a neat trick to help them become fluent. However, it is not a replacement for fluency. They are taught this strategy to help them in a time of need or a time where they really just need to quickly figure out their fact and they're not quite sure off the top of their head. So I'm going to show you the steps to walk through going into the nines trick, and then on the next slide I have a link to a YouTube video that I would like you to watch on how to actually do it with your hands. It's a little difficult to explain to students oftentimes, so modeling it for them is really important in helping them through that. So before you move on to start helping your student, it's a good idea to have an idea of how to actually complete this strategy. So the first thing you have to do is hold your hands out in front of you, palms down. You should be looking at the top of your hand. So you begin at your left pinky, and you're going to count the number of fingers that you are multiplying 9 by. The left pinky is going to count as the first finger. When you count through your fingers, going from left to right, and you get to that number that you're multiplying 9 by, for example, 9 times 5, I would count up to my 5th finger. I would put that finger down. So if it's 9 times 5, my 5th finger would go down, my thumb would go down. Then I look at my hands and I look at the fingers that I have left standing up. Any fingers that are still standing on the left side of the finger that I put down is going to represent the tens digit in the product. So in the case of 9 times 5, I have 4 fingers left standing on the left side. That means my tens digit is going to be a 4. Then I'm going to look at the number of fingers left on the right side of the finger that's down. In the case of 9 times 5, it's going to be 5 fingers. That means the ones digit is a 5, making my product 45. So please watch this video to see how it's actually done. Take some time to practice. In your concept practice, there will be an opportunity for you to practice this skill as well. So once again, thank you so much for being a great support unit to your child at home. And as always, have fun and math on.